Right, let's, if you're ready to roll and rock, I'm ready to rock and roll.
Let's do it.
Talk Radio, it's after midnight. It is now officially Sunday morning. Howard Hughes here. A big edition of The Unexplained tonight at 10 o'clock, by the way. Some very big news on there for you. Check it out from 10 o'clock, if you'd like to, that is. Now, at this stage of the show, every week, we always like to try and find an interesting person to talk about their life and achievements and times. Boy, have we done that tonight. The person I'm going to speak to is somebody who's got a book out at the moment about those things. Her name is Vanessa O'Brien, and she is described as a British and American mountaineer, explorer, aquanaut, author, and former business executive. What's she done, you ask? Well, among many things that are achievements in her life are scaling Everest, K2, which is one of the most murderous peaks in the world, and also going down to one of the lowest, deepest places on Earth. Now, Vanessa, and we'll clear this with her in just a moment when we connect with her just north of New York, is somebody who is adventurous, yes, but I don't think adventurous is the main word to describe Vanessa. Going through the book, and I've had to do a speed read today, and I'm not even completely through it. Determination is the word that comes in more than anything else. Let's cross to her now and see if this is right. Vanessa O'Brien, thank you very much for being on my show.
Hi, Howard. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you keeping in these crazy days of 2021?
Well, it's a challenge, but it's spring now, and what can you say? Spring is a time for renewal, and it's time to get out and enjoy that fresh air and the outdoors.
No, true enough. And you've certainly in your time done more than enough of that. But as they say, hope springs eternal, and spring it is. Okay. I don't know how I'm going to start this because it's very hard to paint an easy thumbnail picture of you. Maybe I should let you do that. I gave that little biographical line there. I'm not convinced, having been through the book, that entirely fits it. So how do you describe you?
Wow. I think, how do I describe me? I am a person that I'd like to say is constantly learning and growing and developing and taking on new challenges. So I am an explorer. I am a mountaineer. I love challenges, and the harder and probably least likely to succeed, the more interesting it is for me. I was always drawn to that eponymous Shackleton's ad of 1913.
Yes.
Men wanted, we remember that. Chance of success, low chance of success, no pay, long hours, those types of things. I always find, the ones that I'm drawn to, the ones that, I find the most interesting. And it always comes down to risk and, risk-reward trade-off. And, probably because people shy away from them, I am drawn to them, and I like to try to problem solve, and I don't mind going to remote areas and, where there's terrible weather and, just where endurance is involved, and just where I'd say where it's probably miserable, the conditions are miserable, and it's not a place that's a lot of fun and most people like to go to. So
you mentioned that, sorry to jump in here, but you mentioned that Shackleton advert for men wanted for an expedition. Of course, Shackleton, famous for his icy adventures, which we've all read about in books when we were kids, and also we probably saw the TV series about that. A remarkable story, but you actually sent a parody version of that advertisement, didn't you, to your friends when you first planned to go to Everest?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The sort of cheekiness of that ad. And, I think when I sent that around and, just having some fun with it, people, sort of thought I had, was sort of one dinner plate shy of a picnic or something. And that I wasn't really taking, they didn't really think that I was going to really climb Everest. I think they thought I might just go and, learn how to climb maybe. And I was living in Hong Kong, so I'd go to New Zealand, figure out how to do this thing. But I don't think they ever really thought I would, try for Everest. And certainly nobody really thought I would, change my life to embrace these types of expeditions. But, the reality is, I think once you are out there and you experience the types of things that you experience and also what you see, which includes, extreme climate change and, nature in all of its glory, it's really hard to come back and, sit behind a desk and push papers around and listen to people,
it all becomes a bit irrelevant. I think there was a measure of Shackleton in you, to be perfectly frank, because Shackleton was a bit of a business person. He was a bit of an entrepreneur, and you too have a business background.
Yeah, well, I am friends with his granddaughter, and she has commented on that as well. So I do have some of the similarities, that Shackleton had. But, nevertheless, it's never easy to do some of these things, and you're never guaranteed success. When I attempted K2, it took 3 consecutive seasons to do that for different reasons, and different reasons in different seasons, gives one hope. And where there's hope, you can pull a thread. And, if you get one camp higher every year, you have data, and therefore you try different things, and that'll lead you to go back. Mm. But, if there's one thing interesting, acclimatization is the one thing that you can't build a competency for, and that's high altitude. So I can train as much as I want, and I can become fit, and I can learn as much as I want about anything. But every time I go to a mountain and I attempt to get higher, I cannot get better at beating the game of high altitude. So every time I go, I start over. So I can't...
Because it's a battle of terrain versus physiology.
Yeah, in other words, I can't become an expert and train myself to be good at high altitude. Every time I go, I start over. It's not something you can train for. So it's one of those really interesting, conundrums that just you can't do. So
that adds a bit of spice and tension to it.
Yeah.
Reading about you, though, you are enormously methodical about the things that you do. You plan, it seems to me, to the nth degree. But there's also an element about you that is decisions made over shots of tequila. There are those two elements in you, it seems.
Yeah, when I wrote the book, To the Greatest Heights, I wrote it a little bit upon request, and certainly I had some time, as we all did during COVID-19, but I wanted to write it to be fun and to have certainly a lot of humor, because these are serious subjects, and mountaineering is a metaphor ultimately for getting through things, or getting over things, or getting to the top, or all of these things you can use. But some decisions, you have to look back and say, hey, where were you? And there were some situations that were quite funny. And all of these things, it is a memoir. These things did happen. And in that particular sequence, when I was in Hong Kong and I was having sort of a crisis of what to do, I was looking at some things of what should I do next. Here I am, first time not working probably since I was 15 years old, and not having a career. And Hong Kong at the time, the Chinese, for those who have ever worked in Asia, are very industrious. They really, really care about money and power and wealth and all of these things. It's kind of like, New York in the 80s. And if you're not working, and I also couldn't find my tribe, and what I mean by that is I couldn't really find my group. I didn't fit with the women who had small children, because every time you met with them, they'd be yelling at, hey, Tommy, stop that, put that down, and, come back and try to talk to you, and it was really, hard to have conversations with them. Or the women who worked went off in Southeast Asia, and you wouldn't see them for months. or the women who played tennis in the morning and drank a bottle of wine at lunch. You just couldn't find your tribe. So it was a combination of things, not working, not having a social group, and trying to find something to do is where that scene takes place. And, I am looking at, hey, should I try to do something with malaria? Should I try to develop a product line because there's all these exotic fruits with antioxidants? And then somebody says, what about Everest? And it's like, wow, Everest. Yeah, I vaguely remember that. Where was it? How high is it? I'm kind of thinking through. And we are actually in a bar. It does have shots of tequila involved. And it just, like, the penny ricochets off the floor, and I just can't get it out of my head. And that leads to a big path of research and, down to New Zealand for training. And, it takes off from there. And of course, I do send that check to an ad to people and say, hey, who wants to come train with me? Of which they all think I'm, Looney Tunes.
Well, that's kind of understandable. You're not like other people. I mean, a lot of other people, and this probably includes me, I might be in a situation where I'm talking about things, and I talk about a lot of things, but I tend, like most people, not to do them. The difference between me and you is that when you say you're going to do something, it seems to me you do.
Yeah, I guess that is true. So when I am thinking out loud, it is leading somewhere to execution, somewhere down the line. And it's just a matter of time. So, and maybe how, that, and levels of interest, So, in that situation, it was a little bit of an existential situation too, because I really didn't know, what I was going to do. So it was a little bit like a midlife crisis, because I wasn't working and my identity had been wrapped up in working. And there's a great scene in the book nobody's really talked about, but it was a big one, with that business card. Mm-hmm. And the business card is, everybody's handing out business cards, because in China it's like, the business card is preceding everybody, and everybody's passing out business cards like, you're invisible unless you have a business card. And for the first time ever, I don't have one. And so I went from being somebody to being nobody. And,
right, you became stateless in a way.
Yeah, and also, as I'm watching this dynamic play out, I was also now for the first time sort of pushed aside as what they say, a tie-tie, like just, a housewife. And it's like, wait a minute, I can't cook, I can't clean, I can't sew, I have none of those skills. That I would definitely not bestow that lovely title on me. That just didn't fit at all.
So basically, you went to Hong Kong. We've just got to explain for my listeners to catch up here. Your husband, Jonathan, you long-distance relationship, effectively, and you picked Hong Kong as a place for you to be. Yeah?
Yeah, so we picked Hong Kong to come together because he was in, we were always traveling, both had, careers, finance careers. And we picked Hong Kong as the place to come together. He was in Tokyo for a short period of time. I was in London, and we came together and we picked Hong Kong. It was between Hong Kong and Australia, and I joke in the book that Australia has 60% of the world's most dangerous things on land and sea. And so, that was a straight no, and sorry, Australians, love you, but, don't love those wicked spiders and platypus and all that other stuff.
Oh, the redbacks.
And he probably doesn't like the snakes. But anyway, everything else is all good. But yeah, so it's Hong Kong, and we're together there, which is great. And that's becomes home. But in becoming home, suddenly it's the foreign language. It had just, I think, that year is when the UK had relinquished control. It had gone back to China.
That's right, 1997.
Yeah, so that, there was change taking place. which was different. It was Cantonese, not Mandarin. So
you have a lot of challenges there, a lot of personal challenges that I completely relate to. But for most people, the answer to them is not normally climbing Everest. So, as we say in London, and you know this because of your Anglo-American situation, in most cases, the answer is not going to Everest. So it makes you unique, I think, in that respect.
Yeah, look, I had effectively become a British citizen. I was in London, 12 years before that. I suppose I could have just sat that one out and just, watch things go by. Of those three things, I probably could have joined the ladies who lunch and had the bottle of wine and managed to make that.
But that's a kind of living death, though, isn't it?
Look, people do it. I guess for a type A person, it's a little bit harder because I felt like I had a lot of energy and a lot of passion. I just didn't know where to channel it, and I needed a vehicle. I needed a project. I needed something to do to put it towards. And what I've come to understand about life and through this process of exploration, and it kind of ties to this happiness thing, but ultimately, and also why people work, but it's the whole sense of self-gratification. It's like, why do people get up every day to do something? They get up to do something to contribute in some way. It also makes them feel good. That they're contributing in some way, that it's a positive feedback cycle. And you get up, you do a radio show, you're investigating all sorts of things, you're giving it to hundreds of thousands of listeners, and they're being able to learn from this. When I first started, exploring, it was more about, can I do it? Later it became about, okay, I can't go there without taking samples and bringing these samples back to find out if there's contamination. Also taking samples in the ocean to find out if there's, samples that we can compare for ocean acidification, because single-cell organisms can't grow their shells effectively if the water's warmer. So, later, as an individual, we grow and we figure out how we can contribute. Because
I think that's a great way around to do things. You had the task first and then you got the purpose. That's a great thing to grow into. Hold that thought, Vanessa. I think we'll go to Everest next, metaphorically and in reality, in fact. Vanessa O'Brien is here. She has a new book out. We'll give you the full details at the end of this. We'll talk about climbing Everest and climbing K2, an adventurous spirit, and more than anything, I think, a determined one. More from her in just a moment. Here with me, Howard Hughes on Talk Radio. Stay here. Vanessa O'Brien with us here on Talk Radio. And Vanessa, before we took that break, as we call it in Radio Land, we were talking about you and the uniqueness of you and the reason why you decided to do this and see it through. So talk to me, if we can compress it, about the process of actually realizing the trip to Everest, because we have to say that the first time you did it, it didn't quite work out in the way that you hoped, yeah?
That's right. So my first trip to Everest was unique in that the decision was, well, Everest was the goal, and I just wanted to climb Everest. There really wasn't a whole mountaineering plan behind it. I just wanted Everest. It was supposed to be a short period of time. It was meeting some criteria, and then I was going to go back to work, right? And it was interesting because I had some methodology that said I had climbed Kilimanjaro, and the way they sold Everest was base camp, camp 2, or the summit. And I had been higher than base camp, and base camp is just a trek. And I was not ready for the summit after learning how to climb and use all the climbing kit in New Zealand. So to get Everest experience, I thought, where should I go? Well, how about Everest? Not to the summit, I'm not qualified, but I had been higher than base camp, so camp 2, right? That makes sense. Only it didn't make sense because the most dangerous part out of base camp is the Khumbu Icefall. And that's what I called in the book my straight red card. Because you don't know what you don't know. And so here I am, like all this research, and there's a lot of it, but I miss the Khumbu Icefall. And part of it is because I'm watching this great series, but it's taking place on the North Face. So they're not talking about the Khumbu Icefall, right? It's not on the North Face of Everest. So anyway, little things like that can happen, but you have to be careful. And
well, you say little things, but you found yourself, didn't you, almost in the teeth of an avalanche?
Yeah, absolutely. And all joking aside, that was a great experience because I go thinking, that I know what all the stuff that I know what all the climbing kit is. I know roughly how to climb, but I don't know what to do when something goes wrong.
You were doing it by the book, but this particular part of it was not in the book.
Correct. And then when something goes wrong, I don't know what to do. And that's when I realized I shouldn't be there. And when, the worst place not to know what you're doing is somewhere like the Khumbu Icefall.
Absolutely. Not to put too fine a point on it. If you hadn't done all the right things in the teeth of that avalanche and got yourselves out of there, you could easily have died.
Yeah, and and it's it was no place to be. I say, there's a mea culpa that says, look, I absolutely shouldn't have been there.
And in the meantime, you're having breathing problems.
Yeah, and I do get pulmonary edema, which is another thing that's water in the lungs. It's really interesting. I was saying something the other day. It doesn't matter what happens to you on Everest, whether it's a medical problem or if it's a physical problem, even if you break your leg. There's only one answer to anything that happens on Everest, and it's to descend. You have to get down.
But some people in the past, though, and as you know, sadly the slopes of Everest are littered with the frozen bodies of people who tried. Sometimes the temptation is to ignore those things. Maybe you're influenced by, maybe your brain is affected by the temperatures and the exertion, or just the feeling of, I am here to do this and I'm going to do it. You made the right decision. You had to. You did the thing that you had to do. But not everybody does that.
Yeah, it's really hard to make judgment calls because every person, every season, every mountain is different. And, it's hard to go back and say something about something like that,
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, correct. In my situation, I had to go down. We did go down. We were very lucky that the Icefall avalanche, and of course, this is 2010. Now, think about the Icefall avalanches of the future that would go on to kill so many people in an icefall, and the earthquakes that would happen. This is like almost foreshadowing something that was going to happen very badly, but not yet. So,
to cut a long story short, it's that particular expedition is over for you then. But you don't think, oh God, this is a disaster. You actually build on that. You train, you learn, and eventually you return.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I walk down on that year, and I go down, I walk all the way down in one shot. And I remember very, very clearly playing like a movie in reverse of every single thing I did wrong, and also making a promise that I would come back and I would do it right. And, I credit that experience to really laying the foundation of having me go back and do it right. Because I go back and I climb 2 8,000-meter peaks back to back, and I would say almost become more of a specialist in high altitude mountaineering rather than mountaineering in general. And really start to understand high altitude, the impacts on the body, the medicine, go back into the training. Ironically, I had trained, putting on more muscle and realized suddenly that, wait a minute, where oxygen's a limited resource, the brain and the lungs must have that limited resource. Muscle will compete with it. I don't want more muscle. I was training all wrong. I was doing so many things wrong, and it didn't occur to me until that minute. So it was so important for me to fail first.
Right, and you go back, and this is not to trivialize what you did. God, I couldn't do it ever. But the actual getting to the summit is a lot easier, it seems to me. It almost appears to be something that's methodically planned and happens. And I'm sure it wasn't like that. You must have had difficulties, to say the least, on the way up. Yeah,
I mean, everything goes wrong, but it's a perfect summit. So, few things could you say that about. But my climbing partner does lose his toes to frostbite,
God.
Which is terrible. And
what did you do? How did you help? Is there anything that you can do in that situation for somebody?
Well, yeah. When we get to Camp 2 on descent, I remove the boots. I put them in, warm, sort of lukish warm water. You don't want the water to be too warm or too hot because it'll thaw the tissue. So it's kind of a coldish warm. And call the Himalaya Rescue Association. We arranged for the helicopter rescue, but the main thing is the interesting thing about frostbite is initially looks exactly. You can't tell the 2 feet apart. They look exactly the same. And when I show this in slides, I like to ask people which foot has frostbite, and it's almost a joke because they look the same. And the reason I like to do that is because I'm telling people about the importance of communication. It's not about what it looks like, it's about what he's telling me. And it's important for me to listen. And the point is, he can't feel the toes on one foot, and that's never okay.
Right, so you have to be the person who realizes what's going on there. That's a responsibility for 2 in that situation. So you go through all of this, you come out of it unscathed. It is, it's a good ascent. But when you get there, it almost seems to me like it's a bit of an anticlimax, because the actual summit itself is the size of, a king-size mattress, I think you describe it?
Yeah, that's right. With some beautiful prayer flags. But yeah, you get there and, it's like, wow, okay. But, what's been programmed in our head is the summit is only halfway. So people are always like, so what was it like? And I want them to be excited. So I say, it's so exciting. You see all this beautiful view and the bluebird day and the triangular face, the shadow on the other mountains. But the reality is, if you're in a marathon and you get halfway, are you stopping to jump for joy? No, of course not. You're halfway. Halfway is nothing. You have to get down. On Everest just now, yesterday, it was announced that 2 people died coming down this year.
Right, so you can't really, it's one of those things that you can't really take enough time to enjoy then, because you're thinking, well, I'm here now, but actually the other 50% is I've got to get down from here.
Yeah, 10 people died in our year on 2012.
Jeez. What was the descent like then?
Well, descents are always harder, so it takes some effort, of course, to step up. Of course it does. Because, you're having to lift your leg and move up. But descent is harder because you have gravity pushing you down. And it's so easy to slip and fall.
Did you nearly?
Not there. K2, I think, was a little bit harder. But I just say in general, and of course, after time, people are always a little bit more sloppy because they're tired, they're thirsty, they're dehydrated, they're cold, they're, through any passage of time. So it's just always harder to go on descent. On descent on Everest, it was fine. I even stopped and gave some medicine to somebody on the way down. Everest I was perfect. Mentally, psychologically, physically. K2 was a tough summit.
Okay, well, let's move on to K2 then. We don't have too many more minutes, sadly. But you're saying that, K2, I've got some figures here. I think it's nearly 80 people so far have lost their lives trying to get to the summit of K2. Maybe that figure's out of date. K2 has a terrible reputation.
Yeah, it's probably closer to 90 now. But it does have a terrible reputation. It took me 3 consecutive years to get to the top. And that third year, we were the only team to summit. And I have to say that, just that last, 3,000 feet was 16 hours one way. And if you've ever done anything for 16 hours, just even stood there in a line, in a queue, if you've ever done anything for 16 hours, it's hard to think of anything you would do. It's an incredible test of patience and endurance. And, you really, really, really have to, you have to stay focused. You have to have concentration. You have to be determined, just all of those things. But now go ahead and add, the 40 below, add the winds, add the snow and precipitation. Now go ahead and add every single thing that could make it worse, right? And then tell me who isn't going to run out of there.
But you didn't.
Oh, no, but that I'm just trying to paint the picture of, and what's fascinating about K2, and I always look back on this, is the only way I could possibly describe it was like Dante's Inferno, because every time we climbed higher, it was almost going through a circle of hell, because when we did get to the top, it was a bluebird day, but you would never know that. It was just so horrendous. So
it was like it was like going through some kind of vortex, I think is the way to put it. Maybe?
Yeah, perhaps. But you couldn't see it. You couldn't see it above you. It's not like you saw it and said, okay, well, we should keep going because up there, no. It's what is above knows what's below, but what is below does not know what is above.
Talk to me, because time is sadly, I never have time enough for these things, but talk to me about when it nearly came unstuck then. You said that you nearly fell. Well,
so I think on descent, it's always a bit tricky with gravity. So you are slipping and sliding, and the ropes tend to, over time, get a little stuck in the snow. So, we try to pull them up and, we either arm wrap and go down, or we use, the ascenders to go down, or sometimes we just rappel. But yeah, I always fall all the time. So it's hard to make that a story, because falling is part of climbing, unfortunately. You just don't want to fall where you fall a great distance and break something. But I have actually fallen and broken things, of course, and I don't know if those are in the book or not, but I did fall, and of course I never fall on a big climbing trip. I fall when I'm training, and I broke 3 tendons in Ecuador training for K2. Or tour.
Did you ever, any occasions, not necessarily K2 or Everest, where you thought that you might die?
So fear is an interesting way of looking at an event. I don't think fear can be planned. I think fear is something that happens to you instantly once you encounter it. So the best way I can describe it to somebody is, let's say you're driving in a car and somebody just immediately pulls in front of you and you slam the brake, and then you think like you're going to hit that car, and all of those chemicals start going through your veins, like that fight or flight symptom. You can imagine that scenario. So it's a little bit like that on a mountain. If you're climbing and let's say you're front pointing on a wall of ice, and you look down and an oxygen like cuts out, and you take that breath and it's not there, your brain triggers, you're out of oxygen. You can't not think, you can't undo that scenario that says it's not there. So it's a sudden impulse that says you're going to die.
Right. Does that make it any easier?
So I'm saying, I guess what I'm trying to say is the fear kicks in the moment that your body is tricked, I guess, in a scenario like that, because of course you didn't die.
I get you. So you're already dealing with it by the time the fear hits.
Yeah, so it's not pre-planned. It's not like, oh no, I don't want to climb that wall because it's steep. It's no, you're climbing the wall, you look down, your hose is twisted, you take that breath, and it's not there, and then that flight or fight chemicals like lactic acid goes through the vein.
Boy, Vanessa, we haven't even covered the half of it here. I hope we get the chance to talk again. You talk about it so matter-of-factly. Have you got another challenge in mind, or have you done everything you want to do now?
You know, there's so many challenges in the world. I hate to almost pick one. You know, people say, well, how about space? You know, that would be great. And it's like,
well, yes, indeed, space.
Space would be great. No problem with that. You know, there's so many variations of space. You know, there's lunar, there's the Kármán line, the difference between outer space and the Earth's atmosphere. But there's shipwrecks out there. There's jungles. So
we're going to be hearing a whole lot more about you, I think. Please, let's talk again. What's the title of this book so people can get it?
Sure. It is called To the Greatest Heights, How I Faced Danger and Found Humility on This Expedition Called Life.
Vanessa O'Brien, thank you very much for your time. And believe me, you have my admiration for all of this. You talk about it very calmly, but boy, I could never face all this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Howard.